4. Take 4 and action. The Optimistic Immigrant, or Optimism No More, by Henry Picard. This is my final English presentation. Can poetry tell us the history of our nation's past and present? Yes, and that's what this presentation's about. The first poem we will be looking at is The United States Welcomes You by Tracy K. Smith. It's a very, very pretty slide. Just want to take a second to appreciate it. Alright. The summary of this poem. In this poem, we are put from the perspective of someone looking at a border agent. It's a very confrontational discussion going on as the reader is almost grilled by the agent. There's very much a theme of mistrust. Despite the United States being one of the most relaxed countries on immigration in the world, we have, over the past several decades, become less accepting of immigration, even legal immigration, as time goes on. America was never the most... though throughout history it's never been picturesque for immigrants, but coming in, generally the idea of the American dream for all was seen as something that was, something more immigrants saw when coming into our nation rather than hostility. Whether or not we want more immigrants in our nation, that's politics, and, well, you can have your own opinions on that. That's not what this presentation's about. This presentation is just saying it's happening. And I have some research at the back to prove it. Now we get into the fun literary analysis stuff. The tone can be interpreted in many ways, but the way I interpreted it was as a almost aggressive questioning or interrogation that definitely perpetrates a feeling of mistrust. The author repeats the beginning of sentences multiple times, just to reinforce the fact that the reader of this poem is not directly aware of who you is in this poem and who that's referring to, which kind of builds upon that earlier theme of mistrust. The structure of the poem's sentences are very short, and there's one that really stands out is, "And why do you invade our night? Hand raised, eyes wide, mute as a ghost." The words never give you a clear idea of going on or who's talking, whether it's the narrator or the speaker, and it helps to continue the theme of not knowing what's going on, mistrust and confusion, which I feel is the major overarching theme of this poem. The New Colossus, I really like this poem. It's much shorter, but it's more optimistic, and I don't know, what can I say? I like optimistic things, so you can read it there, but I should get back to the literary analysis, and I will. What we know about this poem is it's an Italian sonnet written by a Jewish woman. She was a passionate activist. She wrote the poem to help raise funds for the Statue of Liberty's pedestal. The poem compares the Statue of Liberty to the ancient Greek Colossus of Rhodes, saying that where the Colossus of Rhodes was built as a way of Rhodes demonstrating its military might to the world, the Statue of Liberty and America's taking in immigrants is a way of the American dream being shown to the entire world. So by taking in immigrants, that is our point of national prestige instead of, taking over the world. Though we do that too, but you know. The poem is very unironic, and the statue is castigated as a great symbol, and America is seen as a welcomer and protector of immigrants. A very idealized way of looking at things. Some might call it old fashioned, but, you know, I like idyllic romanticism, so. The literary devices. Sorry, something got caught in my throat. The new Colossus gives the statue several human attributes such as a voice. It anthropomorphizes the statue, allowing for it to almost play a role as representative of America as a person or with a personality. It also works given that the poem is all about compassion, and people feel more compassion towards things that act human. Like, think about it. When's the last time you felt bad about killing a spider? Never. Spiders are terrible. But, like, if the spider looked human and talked like a human, then you'd feel bad about killing it. Because, you know, we can empathize with things that look like us. Is the optimistic immigrant something that is no longer a core American virtue? The poem presents the Statue of Liberty as representing the new Colossus. I'm sorry, not the the new Colossus represents the Statue of Liberty as being the altogether sort of synthesis of American values, being willing to defend and accept immigrants, actively welcoming them, almost in a maternal way, promising freedom and the American dream, though there is, at the end of the poem, the idea that the promise of freedom might remain unmet, but even then, it's firm belief in the American dream and sort of the idealized version of what the American dream being acceptable for everyone is. Whereas in the United States, we welcome you, contrasting the new Colossus. It is a lot more dirty and realistic. No one's quite sure what's going on. It can be interpreted in many different ways, depending on how you want to, but there's a clear sense of hostility in the idea that immigrants are coming in. The idea is that they might be able to achieve the American dream, but they also might not. It casts a lot more doubt on something that in America's earlier days, in its youth, was something that it took for granted, even if it wasn't a reality. But people perceived it as a reality, where in later days it was no longer perceived as such. This is just some evidence I found for immigrants being generally more believing in the American dream, and the fact that hostility towards immigrants has gone up in recent decades, which also, interestingly, correlates to belief in the American dream by Americans currently living here going down. Here's some data from Pew Research Center, which essentially just backs what I just said. I'll leave it on screen for a while, and I'll read some of it. So, most immigrants who moved here believe that America will be better for their children, whereas most Native Americans, maybe that's not the right term to use, but Americans who were born here are less optimistic for their children, though interestingly, optimism for their own lives and satisfaction is quite high. Here's a beautiful graph indicating what I said. I love graphs, and, well, who doesn't love a good graph, right? Even if this is a kind of depressing graph. Out of all adults, 50% think that their children will be less well off than they personally are. But among first-generation immigrants, the majority believe that their children will be better off. which just goes to show that belief in the American dream and immigrants coming here for that belief is still very much alive, and the optimistic version of America that we see in the new Colossus isn't dead. And despite some might say that the more realistic way of seeing things in America, we welcome you, is more true in a way, but I don't feel like that's so, because you gotta remember, people still believe in America and the American dream. That's why so many people around the world want to come here, and yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Um, in conclusion, as America's economy rapidly changed, hostility towards immigrants goes up, as it usually does throughout history, because, well, first of all, people don't like foreigners, and second of all, jobs and economy. But, and even though that as immigration becomes less well liked, and we become more hostile to immigrants, the American dream is still alive in many immigrants, and we still do accept quite a lot of them as they come into our great nation. So, at the beginning, America was more idealistic, but in modern decades, we have become more cynical, is kind of as a way of the coming of age story. America's become more jaded and cynical towards immigration, but I personally believe that this jaded cynicism will be a passing phase, and in the end we will return to our more optimistic roots, because in the end, optimistic romanticism, at least if you ask me personally, is just better than cynicism. Cynicism never gets anyone much. But that's personal opinion, that last part. Which, though I guess this is meant to be my personal opinion, so there you go. Things are good and will get better. With that, I thank you for listening to this presentation and hope you have a wonderful day.